Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods. Real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, they call it the World Marathon Challenge. 7 full marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. And Eric Tozer did it all with type 1 diabetes.
There was no way I was not going to finish. I mean, those tough, dark moments where I was marathon number whatever in, it was so much bigger than me that I had this army behind me that I could truly feel. I'm not just saying that. I read the messages and the texts and the posts that came through.
How did he do it? Why did he do it? I have questions, and you did too. Eric shares his story. In our community connection this week, a fun way to help spread the word about Diabetes Alert Day next month. Find out about Divabetic's partnership with an escape room. We'll explain. And tell me something good. Parents weigh in on their teens. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims. So glad to have you along for an epic show today as we are covering Eric Tozer and this really incredible accomplishment. You know, in the past, I was going through some of the archives because we're up to more than 210 shows now. My goodness. We've covered a lot of extreme athletes, and it's always interesting. I mean, I'm not going to be an extreme athlete by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't even call myself an athlete at this point, but I always learn something from these guys, and these men and women. I mean, we talked to Ross Baker, who has run a marathon in every state in the U.S., plus Washington, D.C., Roddy Riddle, who completed one of the most brutal and extreme races in the world, the Arctic Ultra, 350 miles of solo foot race through the brutal cold. We talked to Sebastian Sasseville, who has climbed Mount Everest. I mean, he's finished multiple Ironman races. He ran across the Sahara Desert. And, you know, the list goes on and on. If you just search the word extreme on diabetes-connections.com, you can see all these incredible stories. And when you ask them why, they will tell you generally, you know, to show the rest of the world that people with type 1 can do anything, right? They don't have to be limited. But they'll also say they want to inspire the type 1 community. And I know there are a lot of athletes, parents of athletes listening this week. Benny is about to start lacrosse, something new. Love that he always wants to start something new. Can't stay with the same stuff. So we'll be learning how diabetes and lacrosse go together in the next couple of weeks. Oh my goodness. But I also think these stories are fantastic for those of us who, as I said, will never be extreme athletes. I am not a runner. I work out. I'm trying to stay in shape. I started a yoga class this year. I think it's important, but I'm not going to run up Mount Everest, right? I am not going to run across the Sahara, but I can still learn so much from these stories, and I hope you can too. And, you know, diabetes or not, you know, what makes somebody decide to dedicate so much of their life to this? I am fascinated by it. And if you are interested in the more athletic side of diabetes, Eric is part of something called the Diabetes Sports Project. So we're going to talk about that too. Before we go any further, though, do me a favor. I have a favor to ask of you this week. Share the show. Even if you just share a Facebook post about it or tell a friend. If you get the newsletter, forward the email onto somebody else. I would really appreciate that. Word of mouth is definitely the best way to help us share these stories with more and more people. So thank you for helping out. And if you're thinking newsletter, you know, what's that? I do that every week. We send out the episode right to your email. I also put in a little article about something else in there that we don't talk about the show. It is newsletter exclusive. And you can sign up for that just by going to diabetes-connections.com, or I will put out a link this week. We did get a fun review on Apple Podcasts. I want to read that to you. It's quick. It comes from Heyman91, who writes, "Love this new segment. Keep up the great work." And by the new segment, I assume that they mean Tell Me Something Good, which has become such a great part of my show prep every week, where I get to read all these terrific stories of people who want to celebrate a diversary or a milestone, or just tell me something good that's going on in their lives. So we'll get to that a little bit later on. This is a parent and teen edition this week. It just fell that way. So I'm excited to share some good news about our teenagers, right? But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. You know, when Benny was very little and in the bathtub or at the pool, I always noticed his fingertips. You know exactly what I mean, right? They were poked so much. They were just full of those little pinpricks. And when he got wet, you could really see it. I mean, he's 14 now. I don't see his hands close up a lot. But the other day, he had just washed his hands, and I noticed that his fingertips look normal. We've been using the Dexcom for 5 years now, and with every new iteration, we've done fewer and fewer finger sticks. The latest generation, the Dexcom G6, eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. Just thinking about how we would really do 10 finger sticks a day routinely in the past, it makes me so glad that Dexcom has helped us come so far. It's an incredible tool. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week recently completed something that really just shouldn't be possible. The World Marathon Challenge is 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. Eric Tozer is the first person with type 1 to complete the challenge, which starts in Antarctica and finished up February 6th in Miami, where Eric's family joined him. You might have seen the pictures online, his 2 little girls crossing the finish line with him. Eric Tozer, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we have questions. I have a lot of questions for you, and I put this to my listeners. You know, there's so much to talk about here. I'd like to also talk about the Diabetes Sports Project, which you co-founded. But let's focus on the World Marathon Challenge. What on earth possessed you? Why did you want to do something like this? Do you remember when you thought, yeah, that would be a good idea?
Yeah, good question. I wanted to do something that was profound and had as massive and big and monumental of an impact on the diabetes community as possible. The good and really exciting news is that as I looked around for something that hadn't been done, there was a challenge to find something, which is exciting because it means that Sebastian's climbed Everest and a group of us had, already ran across America. And, Fiona won a stand-up paddleboarding world championship. And there's so many amazing accomplishments out there in the diabetes community, which is wonderful. And so it was equal parts, frustrating trying to find something that hadn't been done, but also really inspiring to know that there's so many champions out there doing so many great things. Somebody sent me an article to this and said, hey, you should do this. And I'm always up for a challenge. And I think it was a great opportunity and sort of privilege to do this because, one, to give that example to the community that life with type 1 can be as amazing as we want it to be. There's no reason we can't accomplish the seemingly impossible. And I think this was a great example of that. But then also it was so much bigger than me. And I think that helped in a lot of ways. But it's also not every day that we get to push ourselves and kind of find what we're capable of. I think, I have a full-time job and manage Diabetes Sports Project, and we have 2 young kids. And so it's easy for us to get caught up in the day-to-day and kind of go through life. So having the opportunity to do something of this magnitude I was really fortunate to be able to undertake it and to do it for those of us with type 1 and the communities. It made it that much more important and that much more special.
Let's back up a little bit because, you can't just start with the World Marathon Challenge. And you were diagnosed with type 1 when you were in your early 20s. Were you already running at that point? Were you very much into these extreme athletic stuff at that point?
No, my running consisted of chasing the soccer ball. I was a soccer player. I played in college. We got to the national championship. I grew up playing every sport, but actually didn't get into endurance sports until, I think it was after I was diagnosed with type 1. I think a couple years afterward, I did my first event. I had never been on a bike before, but I signed up to do a 200-mile bike ride with my company from Seattle to Portland. and then did a half Ironman, and kind of that sent me down this path, and absolutely love it. I enjoy running. I know a lot of people despise it, but for me, it's time to sort of, for clarity, and I find it relaxing. It's nice to kind of get some fresh ideas out there. But this extreme 7 marathons in a week was definitely outside of my comfort zone and beyond anything I had really done before. But I had done, I think 3 or 4 marathons in total, and a couple Ironman triathlons. While it wasn't extreme, I had built up my endurance sports to some extent over the past few years.
Okay, now wait, just to be clear. Okay, so but the Ironman triathlons include a marathon in there.
That's it. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. A Ironman triathlon, 140.6 is a 2.4 mile swim followed by a 112-mile bike ride and then a marathon. So yeah,
You got some training in.
Pretty extra. Yeah. I hadn't done one for a couple of years though. So I think, having kids and a full-time job and managing a foundation is obviously, my girls are priority number one. And so that kind of sports took a bit of a backseat.
So you said you were diagnosed pretty much right out of college, early 20s. What do you remember about that? Can you tell us a little bit about your diagnosis and how things changed for you?
Yeah, we all have our diagnosis stories, right? And I think it's scary. It's unnerving if you don't know anybody with it. I didn't know. We had one family friend that I kind of knew, but I didn't really know what it meant. I hardly knew there was type 1 and type 2. So I was pretty naive, and I credit my sports background and upbringing and that competitive mentality, because I distinctly remember the phone call. I remember where I was seated. I was, what I was wearing practically. And this is 2006. So almost 13 years ago now. And I remember hearing the news, and maybe I was naive. Maybe I was just super optimistic, because I'm a pretty optimistic person. But I remember thinking, okay, could have been worse, but what do I need to do to make this thing, this type 1 diabetes, which I really don't know much about yet, what do I need to do to make this thing fit into the life I want to live? As opposed to saying, okay, gosh, what do I have to take away from my life? What can't I do anymore to make my life fit type 1? I wanted to not let it stand in the way. And I'm very conscious and sensitive to the fact that that might not even be a safe mentality to have, but I think that and there's been examples all along the way, and hopefully this is another one, that life with type 1 can be as normal as life without. We just have to do certain things, right? We have to know our blood sugar. We have to know when and how much insulin to take. And thankfully the tools and the technology out there make it much more possible and make management that much easier. But that diagnosis was scary, but I think having that competitive mindset, I didn't want to let it stand in my way. And so that kind of set me down the path that I'd been going.
Do you remember how quickly you got back on either soccer field or, jumping back in sports?
I was diagnosed in early August, and I had just graduated college and, coming off of a soccer career in college. And so I was supposed to start my job across the country September 1st. So that was 3-4 weeks later, basically. And I was diagnosed 2 or 3 days later, drove across to St. Louis to start my job and move in, to an apartment, kind of started this whole new career while managing this new thing. And so I don't remember stopping being active. I think I remember I jumped into sort of competitive soccer league for adults when I lived in St. Louis, but there was a lot of trial and error. I mean, I think back to what I was doing back then compared to what I know now, and it's scary, how little I knew and what I was doing. I mean, it's comical, but thankfully we can laugh about it now because, it all worked out. But, in those early days, that's where JDRF Online came in handy, sort of learning as much as I could about it and sort of become a student of the game with type 1. And so that's the whole reason we started Diabetes Sports Project, is so when people are diagnosed, they have somewhere to go to look for examples and also education.
Right back to Eric in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The One Touch Vario Flex Meter seamlessly syncs with the free One Touch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the One Touch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, One Touch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch Vario Flex Meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. Now back to my talk with Eric Tozer. So I took a lot of questions in about the marathon. So let's talk about the World Marathon Challenge.
Yeah.
And the biggest question that came up was, of course, how do you manage blood sugars during something like this? Can you talk a little bit about, the range that you'd like to be in, or how do you do during the races, and how do you manage in general, I guess, how did you manage diabetes during all this?
Yeah, there's that great Mike Tyson saying, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. I think there was a little bit of that, right? I think we went in with the game plan. I had worked with my endocrinologist. We knew, kind of what my plan was. We knew based on the principles that I take shots with a pen. So I've got my basal that I take every night and then my bolus injections throughout the day. And so we knew that my basal was likely going to decrease how much I needed. But there was a chance over the course of 7 days that it might actually need to ramp back up because of that prolonged stress on the body. So we went with a bit of a question mark, but being ready to make changes as we went. And that's where the practice comes in. And just as I was practicing my running or training my legs and my lungs and my heart to be able to run, I was also training my, kind of type 1. So all those long runs, all the runs during the leading up to the race, dialing in, what nutrition to have, how often to have it. For me, it was about 50 to 55 grams of carbohydrate every hour. At that rate, at sort of marathon effort level, that much food and drink being put back in would keep my blood sugar stable. That's in say, normal marathon conditions. This one was anything but normal, obviously. So having my Dexcom was instrumental. Absolutely critical. Having the CGM was absolutely critical because I was able to keep an eye on. So those races where there was a lot of kind of upset stomachs, I think, due to the travel, the plane food, and just the chaos of the week. So, one race, I didn't get to eat, I couldn't eat anything for the whole marathon. I had a goo Cliff bar or like a goo bar at the start of the race. And then I couldn't stomach food. It was, 4 marathons in or something. The only thing that was able to settle and stay down was a Coke. And so about a third of the way through the marathon and 2/3 of the way through the marathon, because I knew I needed to be able to keep my sugar stable, I drank 2 Cokes, and that sort of between the caffeine and the sugar, and the calories gave me enough fuel to get through. But it was less of a roller coaster than I expected. I think because of the stress on the body with the travel and lack of sleep and just sort of always going, I was expecting more of a roller coaster. But again, that's, I think, where CGM comes in so handy. I did need to reduce my basal rate. I brought it down a good amount the very first day, but then ended up having to bring it down a little bit more and even a little bit more, kind of 1 unit here, more than I expected, because the first marathon or two, I was hovering a little bit lower, kind of between around the 75 to 80 mark on my blood sugar, and wanted to be higher than that just because that's a little bit too low for comfort. And there's science out there that shows that the ideal blood sugar for performance, thanks to the PEAK program that JDRF put together, the ideal blood sugar is in that mid 100 range. So that's sort of where we perform, where our bodies perform the best. So that's what I was aiming for. And some races it was on there. One race it was a bit high. And so I was just trying to get as much fluids in as I could to bring it back down. But I knew that if I injected much of a basal, that it would kind of come crashing down. And so it was a bit of a flying by the seat of my pants for each race and taking each race one at a time, both from a nutrition and blood sugar standpoint.
Let me jump in, though, and ask you to go a little further. I'll link up the PEAK study, as you mentioned, from JDRF in the show notes or at diabetes-connections.com. But I think it might surprise people to realize, as you said, it's that mid 100 level where people do perform the best. I think most people think we're going to try to be between, 80 and 100 or a lower blood sugar. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is it because is it beyond just not wanting to drop? Is it truly just at that blood sugar we do better?
Yeah, and Dr. Inigo San Milan out of Colorado. He's done some great studies on this. And like I said, it's in the PEAK stuff. So I'm not the medical expert here, but I think it's a combination of it. I think for a lot of people, they don't like to be low during exercise because of that fear of going too low. And if you're low, you're kind of not getting that glucose back into your body as well. And so I think the number that was out in the PEAK, I believe it's between 140 and 160. And that's not to say that 100 or 170 isn't great. I think
sure.
It is, based on the chart, it was sort of that was number in the middle there. But I think it's a combination of people's preference. I know people who say, hey, I like to start high and basically run my way down. But as we know, if your blood sugar's high, you don't feel great. Your body's not functioning, at its best. And so for me, anytime I'm above 180, 200, I just don't feel as energetic and kind of as productive as I would if I was lower. So yeah, it's the combination. And, as you well know, right, everybody's type 1 management is so unique and individualized that some people are like, I need to be at 90 and that's where I perform best.
I got a question from Scott over Facebook who says, I actually don't think this was a diabetic challenge, but more of a physical challenge. And he wants to know, how did you recover, in between the races? How did you fuel your body? Did you stretch, massage? Racing at this level is incredible. But as an Ironman and a marathon, I see this outside of the diabetes. Can you talk about that?
Yes. The physical challenge for, there was about 40 people that were along that did the race with me. And the physical challenge is obvious. Kind of finish a marathon, and we had to wait for everybody to finish. So some people, Mike Wardian, world-class marathoner, one of the fastest runners in the world, he was coming in just under 3 hours every race, which is absolutely just stunning. And some people were doing kind of a run walk, so they would be around, closer to 7 or 8 hours. I finished just about 4 hours for every marathon on average. And so, we had those extra 3-4 hours to get changed, start to relax and recover. I had a recovery drink that I would have as soon as I could afterward to get some of that fuel back in and allow the body to recover sort of on the inside. And then everything from stretching to icing, foam rolling, all that kind of stuff. I used a Compex machine that sort of sends electronic shock through your muscles and whatnot to help it recover faster. So, there's all kinds of tools and tricks to recovery and getting the muscles ready and the body ready to recover as fast as possible. But the biggest thing was sleep. So I have a hard time falling asleep right after a marathon. I remember in Dubai, we finished the race, as we did for a lot of races, we finished in the middle of the night. So it's 2 or 3 a.m. We're finishing a marathon. We should be fast asleep, and they had rented us kind of a couple hotel rooms for people that finished early to go crash in. And so I was in the room, and it was actually Super Bowl Sunday back in America. And it was a pretty fascinating experience to be kind of following the Super Bowl on social media or whatnot, because it wasn't on the TV. And then hearing the call to prayer going over the speakers around the city, that was certainly a first for me, having that combination. But I was just so wired that I couldn't sleep. And so by the time we left, 2 hours later, maybe I hadn't slept a bit. And then we've got drive to the airport, get on the plane. They tried to give us a meal as fast as possible so we could go to sleep. And then it was, about a 6 or 8 hour flight, maybe over to Spain. So try to sleep as much as possible. So I don't know what my average sleep was on the plane, maybe 4 or 5 hours, if that. But sleep's obviously, I think that's one of the most important components of recovery is letting the body recover. So on the plane, it was stretching on the plane, and people were sprawled out on the floor trying to stretch and do massaging and whatever we could do to kind of keep injuries at bay and get the legs ready.
Okay, so wait a second. Just to be clear, because this World Marathon Challenge is something that you have to, you sign up for, you enter, there's an organization. They're flying. Is it everybody who's doing the World Marathon Challenge is on the same plane? Yeah,
so you pay for the race, and it's part of that fee goes to cover essentially a chartered flight. And so the plane is, we were on the same plane for the whole week, and you've got your kind of assigned seat. And I was lucky enough, I got to sit next to Mike Wardian, who I was just telling you about. So to see firsthand behind the scenes, one of the best runners in the world, how they prepare, how he prepares, and was really fascinating, pretty neat experience. But we would all get on a plane, and that was sort of our transportation to and from each country.
So everybody's trying to sleep. Everybody's kind of doing the same thing. You're not trying to like get the flight attendant and put your tray table back into the upright position and all that stuff.
Well, there's still the same protocol, right? You know, we have to wake up for landing because you've got to put your seat up and you've got to put your tray table up and windows up, and so even the 17-hour flight from Cape Town to Perth, Australia, we had 2 fuel stops, and so that broke it up a bit, and so it's you would still kind of have to wake up for that if you were sleeping. But yeah, lots of trying to get earbuds in or eye masks on and try to sleep as much as possible.
So another question that came up quite a bit was all about time zones. When you're mentioning all these different places that you're flying, and you're running in the middle of the night, what was it like for time zones in terms of diabetes? How did you try to take your basal shot at the same time? Were you trying to stay on? You're on Pacific Coast time most of your regular life, right? Did you just try to stay on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the time zones and jet lag and time of day, what day it was, that all became a blur. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner didn't really make sense. It was sort of a race, have a meal, go to sleep, wake up, have some food, stretch, recover, maybe try to go back to sleep, and then race again, and then rinse and repeat, right? So I'm on pens. I take my basal shot every night about 9, 10 o'clock Pacific time. So what I did was I set on my phone, I just set a timer for 24 hours. So wherever I was in the world, that timer would go off at 24 hours, and then I would reset it. So that meant sometimes I was 10 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. If I was in Dubai or wherever, it was obviously a different time of the day. And so that kept me as close as I could to a normal insulin injection for my basal.
Another question, and this was kind of wrapped up into time zones and jet lag, was how about hydration? I mean, you mentioned trying to eat and those 2 Cokes when you couldn't eat anything else. Did you do anything special to try to drink enough water between races? Yeah,
I mean, I fuel and I hydrate a lot when I'm just at work, right? So I was constantly drinking, whether it be kind of like a goo or electrolyte tab or whatnot, trying to stay hydrated as much as possible, because if you have dehydration, then your blood sugars can get all out of whack. And so, but also obviously for the performance side of it, hydration was critical. And when you fly, hydration is critical. So it was a whole combination of things. We went from Antarctica somebody just sent me a post that Antarctica was -20 with the wind chill. When it wasn't windy, I believe it was in the teens, but obviously, when that wind picked up, it got very cold. We went from that and we flew straight back to Cape Town for marathon number 2, which was within 24 hours so the first 2 were literally back to back. And in Cape Town, it was in the 90s weather-wise. So we went from one extreme to the other. And that one was, extremely hot. We were running on a very hard, sort of that old colonial, almost cobblestone-like street. So truly one extreme to the other. And I carried a water bottle or 2 for that entire race, filled mostly with just ice and some water just to keep my temperature down. And I can't count the amount of bottles that we went through that day. But yeah, always drinking, kind of a combination of water, electrolyte drinks, and then even a sports drink for some calories throughout the day.
You've mentioned your job a couple of times, and I haven't asked, what is your full-time job?
I do sales in the healthcare space. We work for a company called Thrive, and I've basically been here since 2006, since I started, but we help hospitals essentially run financially and operationally more effective. So we sell kind of web-based tools, consulting services, analytics, and sell to the CFO and CEO and kind of the C-suite of health systems and help save them millions of dollars, basically. So,
well, and while I'm asking you about that, let's bring up the Diabetes Sports Project as well, because you mentioned that earlier. You're doing all of this full-time job, family, running, and these extreme events, and the Diabetes Sports Project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Diabetes Sports Project, DSP. It's something I'm so proud of and humbled to be a part of. It's started with a group of us that wanted to use our athletic accomplishments as a tool. And we said, as great as it is that we've collectively qualified for Ironman World Championships or Boston Marathon or climbed Everest or whatever it might be, if we don't use those accomplishments as a way to inspire and educate the community, we're kind of missing the big picture, right? And so nobody makes any money from the foundation. I don't take a salary. All the funds we raise go back to creating community weekends. So we'll do whether it's a marathon, a triathlon, or yoga event, whatever it is, we bring type 1s from around the country, around the world together to do events as one. So we did a Ragnar a couple months back where we brought a bunch of type 1s together. And if they need help training, we've got some of the best athletes in the world with type 1. So we can help them with training, and we can also help with sort of the type 1 management changes that might come into play with the training. And then we come together for this weekend and we'll do some community events. We might go speak at the Children's Hospital the day before the race, do sort of a team dinner, and then do the event, as one. So it becomes this really empowering weekend. And so we try to do that as much as possible. And, in addition to now we've got about 100 athletes around the world, from, yoga teachers to gymnasts to some of the fastest, world-class athletes, all different backgrounds and sort of accomplishments. So it's a lot of fun. I probably talk to a family or two every other day from somewhere around the world, whether they be newly diagnosed and kind of just out of the hospital and get connected, or 20, 30 years of managing it and need somebody to kind of talk with or bounce ideas off of or whatnot. But we got just a great group of people that help in their free time run this organization, and couldn't be more proud of the impact that we have. Speaking at, I think last year we did about 70 events that our athletes went and kind of spoke at or were a part of around the world. So, trying to make an impact however we can. And it's a lot of fun.
I did get a couple of questions from parents asking about that, and if there's a possibility or an opportunity for teenagers to get involved with the Diabetes Sports Project. Is it adults only? Can kids do things?
Nope. No, I think kids are that much more rock stars. I think it's not so much about being the fastest athlete in the world. I think that's, to some degree, is actually, that's really impressive and inspiring, but a big part of it, and something that I hear a great appreciation for, is being relatable. It's not, we make, a few $1,000s a year in donations, and that money goes straight back into those community events, or to send athletes to go talk at a diabetes camp, or go talk at, a children's hospital, or wherever we're requested, really. And so it's our kind of a DSP athlete is somebody that doesn't let type 1 stand in the way, whether it's 10-year-old gymnasts, and we've got high school golfers and college football players and, weightlifters, and kind of this whole spectrum of athletes. Because our goal is, somebody goes to our website, goes to our Facebook page looking for that inspiration. They might not care that I ran 7 marathons around the world, or they might not care that Ben Smine qualified for the Ironman World Championships, or Sebastian climbed Mount Everest. They might be a basketball player. So we need to have a basketball player, and then for them to sort of look to as their point of inspiration. So it's a complete mix, and just that mentality of thriving with type 1, that's the only real prerequisite, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we'll link up, the Diabetes Sports Project at our website and in the show notes as well, because I know there are, as you said, there are events coming up and there are ways to get involved. So that's great.
Yeah.
Back to the World Marathon Challenge. I'm curious, with something like that, we mentioned the chartered plane and the food and everything else. I know there are a lot of sponsorships, and it's okay if, this might be a delicate subject, so you don't have to answer. But I know you did this in partnership with JDRF. How does that work? Can you share a little bit of the detail of it? Because I assume, look, here's what I'm asking. I assume that my research dollars, as wonderful as you are not going for you to run the marathons, right? That's something different.
That's right. Yeah. So JDRF and my wife worked there for 6 years. I've known the team there for a long time, and just been such a fan, as I said, from my early days of being diagnosed, such a fan of the organization. And we as a community wouldn't be where we are without JDRF. They are the leaders in the space when it comes to research and trying to find a cure and just improving daily life, right? So when we came together in this partnership, we're really thankful and fortunate to have companies like Medtronic, Sparkling Ice, Champion and Hanes, Ford and Garmin, that they all came forward and said, look, we want to help make this possible. And so it's because of companies like that we were able to do this. So it was very much a partnership, and JDRF and I kind of go into those companies, and it's because of them that I was able to do the race. so the research dollars and critical things were not impacted by this. And
it's kind of ugly to ask, I suppose, but it does take us a little bit of Googling to find out that it's like $41,000 to enter this.
It's expensive, but I'll tell you, to travel around the world in 7 days, logistically and cost-wise, it probably would be more. So
I can't imagine.
I had actually considered doing something bigger, where in the sense, or sort of more spread out, where I went to each continent and spent a week or so in the community, but it was going to be, so much more expensive and so much more time consuming. I just didn't have either of those resources. And so, yes, it is a large amount of money. And thankfully, like I said, Ford, Garmin, Haynes, Sparkman and Ice, Medtronic, they came forward and were so, just so grateful for them to be able to make this possible. We couldn't have done it without them.
Just one or two more questions from the listeners, if you don't mind. A big question came up about nutrition. How do you eat, not just on the marathons, but, how do you eat in your day-to-day life? Do you mind talking about that? Do you follow a particular diet plan? I know everybody with type 1 is different. We certainly don't espouse one type of eating on this show, but that question did come up.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and the funny part is I have a sweet tooth. So a doctor early on told me, if you want to have a piece of cake at a birthday party, have a piece of cake at a birthday party. You just need to know how much insulin, what's your ratio, do you have insulin on board, where's your blood sugar trending, is it going up, is it going down, So as long as you know the mechanics of it, for me, it's like I said at the start, right? I didn't want to let type 1 define what I could or couldn't do. And that involves what I eat, how I live, athletically, what I want to do. But in terms of diet, I'm thankful my wife has a wonderfully healthy diet. And so as a result, I do, because otherwise I probably wouldn't. But it's a balanced approach of carbs, fruits and vegetables, dairy, protein, kind of the whole, what you would expect from kind of an athlete's diet. I look at whether it be LeBron James or, any athlete out there, right? What does an athlete need to perform at their best, whether it be training day, rest day, recovery drinks, and then how do I make my type 1 fit that sort of a diet? And so during the race, it was really, I was burning about 4,000 calories per race. So it was a matter of just getting calories back in. And those days where I couldn't stomach things, it was just whatever worked. I had brought a lot of extra food with me just in case, because I wasn't sure what the plane food was going to look like. So I had protein bars and sort of protein powder type shape, trail mix, crackers, nuts. Kind of everything and anything that I thought I might want. And I went through a lot of it. Lots of simple foods, granola bars and things like that weren't going to risk causing upset stomachs. Yeah, just trying to get some calories back in.
What's your advice for people listening who are thinking, okay, I may not run 7 marathons in 7 days, but I want to step up the way I work out. I was surprised to find out in our journey with diabetes, because Benny was diagnosed 12 years ago, and we were always told, he can do anything. And I would call the endo and say, okay, we're going to try soccer. Go for it. We're going to try baseball, whatever. He's going to play football. Yes. But I have been told along the way that a lot of people, especially a generation ago, but even more recent, were told no, or don't do that, or it's too dangerous. So there's a lot of fear about exercising and about athletics in our community. I know that's a multi-layered question there, but what is your advice for people with type 1 and those of us who love them to go for it? How do you get there, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, there's no reason, and if I can show nothing else, but there's no reason that anybody with type 1 can't live the fullest life. And there was that hashtag that was going around, no limit. It's so true. And if this can be an example of that, then job done. But it comes down to education, right? And knowing. And that's where I think the PEAK program that JDRF spent, 3 years putting together with the top medical minds from around the world. And, we sat around the table. I was fortunate enough to be a part of it, but we sat around the table and say, okay, here's scenario number 1. What does it look like medically? And then they'll kind of, hey, Eric, what does it look like from an athlete perspective? Does this make sense? And so, we have now 100-something pages of every athletic scenario before, during, after, different types of exercise and what type 1 management needs to look like. And, whether it be adrenaline at the start, how do you deal with adrenaline? And knowing what do you do with insulin for something like adrenaline, or it's the difference between swimming, soccer, weightlifting, marathon running, all of those might affect your blood sugar differently. So fortunately now there's this, I kind of think of it like a guidebook of kind of type 1 in sports. And it's so important. It's just so helpful. And I was very thankful that they created this because it's been helpful to me. I mean, I sat around the table with these doctors and I was taking notes, but that's the biggest takeaway for me is that there's no limit to life with type 1. We just need to know how to do it. We've got the tools and the technologies to make management easier and to successfully thrive with type 1 when it comes to sports. I think that the hardest part is signing up, whether it be a 5K, signing up for soccer, signing up for swimming, whatever that might be. The hardest part for me in this full marathon challenge was signing up and putting it online saying, I'm going to do this, because as soon as you do, that's...
Wait a minute. I don't believe that for 1 minute. That was the hardest part, not making it physically through the challenge?
The physical challenge was hard, 100%. I mean, it was the most challenging physical experience of my life, without a doubt. But having the courage to sign up for something, I think that's the hardest part, because once you sign up, then it's sort of, you're in, you're committed. And from that point, I think it's fun. If you do it right, if you train smart and, kind of do it in a way that your body stays, if you're looking at a marathon, it might be a few months of training. And for me, the biggest part was getting through that training that was so foreign to me and was such an extreme amount of training compared to what I had ever done, that it was, how do I get through this without overdoing it and getting injured and getting to the start line healthy? And that set me up for success in the race. And then when it came to the race, I mean, I've said it all along. I mean, having the millions of people supporting behind the scenes, there was no way I was not going to finish. I mean, those tough, dark moments where I was marathon number whatever in, it was so much bigger than me that I had this army behind me that I could truly feel. And I'm not just saying that. I read the messages and the texts and the posts that came through every day when we landed. And that's what made it manageable and kind of gave me that fuel along the way.
One more question before I let you go here. We saw the picture, I mentioned it towards the beginning here, of you crossing the finish line in Miami of the last race with your daughters. You have 2 little girls. They're almost 6, almost 3. I mean, they're little.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Do you remember what was going through your mind when you crossed that finish line with your family?
That was everything. I mean, it's a very, very special moment that I'll never forget. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it now. But, I hadn't really planned it with 83 miles or whatever it was. I didn't want to start thinking about marathon number 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 while I was in Cape Town or Antarctica. And so kind of take it 1 mile at a time, 1 marathon at a time. So when we got to Miami, that was, the reception was amazing. And just, there was, I'm not a very emotional guy, but getting to the finish line with my girls was certainly pretty special. And, just glad the cameras weren't too close. But, about halfway through the race, I started thinking about kind of the finish line, which, maybe I shouldn't have done. I still had, a handful of miles to go, but thought that would really be special if I could do it. And so my wife and some of the team there, got the girls ready for it. And, at that point I wasn't too worried about my time and walked the last, 10 or 15 yards with them, which was pretty special. And so to hear them talk about it now, and, my daughter was just asked about, she has a journal that she writes in for school in kindergarten, and she wrote kind of about crossing the line with me. So that was certainly special. So hopefully it's, if you can give them an example, that's everything. And to be a role model for them is kind of my priority number 1 in life.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for talking to me, sharing so much of your story and giving so much of your time. Congratulations on this incredible achievement. And thanks for sharing it with us. It's, I know you really do feel like you took the type 1 community along with you. And so it's so nice to know you were reading all those messages, and I know they were coming in. It is great to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Lots more information and some videos about Eric, and a lot of news stations have picked up the story, and there's some great stuff out there. So I'll link everything up in the show notes or at diabetes-connections.com, as well as that PEAK study, which I think sounds amazing, as he said, for coaches And, anybody who's an athlete with type 1, really great resource there by JDRF. And we'll be talking about the Diabetes Sports Project in the weeks to come as well. They have some great stuff coming up. And if you want to get more involved in that, they are looking for participants for a few events they have this year. I will link that up as well. In our community connection this week, Mr. Divabetic and the Escape Room. Community Connection is brought to you by Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T:slim X2 insulin pump. Have you heard of Divabetic? Mr. Divabetic himself, Max Sadak, has been, first of all, he's been part of Diabetes Podcast Week since the very beginning, and I really appreciate his support when we started that back in 2015. But Divabetic is a diabetes information website, and he does a podcast as well. And it's really interesting. He was inspired by Luther Vandross, the late R&B legend. And it was founded because Max was Luther Vandross's longtime assistant. So he combined the word diabetic with the letter V for Vandross, and you get Divabetic. Also, you have such a great word with diva. And he does so many great things. He makes terrific videos. He, of course, does the podcast, and he's doing something new. I'll let Max tell you a little bit more about it.
Hi, this is Mr. Divabetic inviting you to the first ever Diabetes and Heart Health Escape Room experience called Clued In on National Diabetes Alert Day, Tuesday, March 26, 2019, sponsored by Boehringer Ingelheim. It's free, it's fun, and you've got 6 fantastic rooms for you and your friends to choose from.
Isn't that great? This is an event that Max is putting together in March, as you heard, to raise awareness about diabetes and heart disease. So he is working together with the sponsor, as you heard, and with the Escape Room in New York City. And what happens here is to register for the event, you either take a diabetes risk test to assess your risk factor for type 2, or you take a heart IQ quiz for people living with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. So it includes, the diabetes community overall. It's a great twist on getting education out there. And I think it sounds like a really fun event. So thanks, Max, for letting us know about that. Again, this is really only in New York City. I will link up all of the information at diabetes-connections.com. But there is a lot going on in March for Diabetes Alert Day, which is March 26th. And while that focuses on type 2 mostly, letting people know whether they are at risk for type 2 diabetes, because a lot of people are walking around with prediabetes or type 2 and they don't know it. It can also be used to focus on education about type 1. So thank you, Mr. Divabetic, for sharing that information with us. And I will link it all up in the show notes and at diabetes-connections.com. Okay, we are cooking now when it comes to Tell Me Something Good. I had some great responses this week and picked a bunch that feature parents saying nice things about their kids. Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. And sometimes you just want something convenient. Today is a perfect example. We were all running around. I cooked dinner every night this week, but I didn't tonight. We were just too busy, but I had leftovers in the fridge. So I told the kids, you can heat this up. We got that. I made chicken in the crock pot. I made a pasta sauce, a meat sauce. Just eat whatever you want. Eat a bowl of cereal, whatever. But it's all there for you, and I'll be home later. So when I came home, they hadn't touched the leftovers, but Benny made himself a Real Good Foods pizza. Okay, fine. I can't really complain because it's full of veggies. He can make it himself. It's delicious. It's low carb and it is grain free. I mean, he doesn't really care about the second and third points there, but he knows that it is delicious. And I like it because it's really convenient. You don't have to order by mail. The cauliflower crust pizzas, the poppers are right in the grocery store or Walmart freezer. You can order online. There's a lot of variety there, and that's a really nice way to get mixed packs to taste everything. Real Good Foods makes it easy. Find out more. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Okay, tell me something good. We are going to go through 3 fabulous children here. So Billy writes in that my daughter is 10. She was diagnosed at 6, and she's been helping at her school library. As a reward, she's been getting candy. She just told me this one day, and I said, "Where's the candy?" Well, she said, "I ate it. The librarian knows I have diabetes, so she showed me the package. I used the carb count, dosed, and ate it. I got this, Mom." Yeah for her, and yeah to the librarian. And yeah to you, Billy. Thank you so much for sending that in. Carmen writes, my 19-year-old sophomore son in college is an Eagle Scout and landed the lead in Mary Poppins this summer. He continues to sing, dance, and act while pursuing a degree in cybersecurity. He was diagnosed at the age of 10 in 2009. Congratulations on all of that. An Eagle Scout, my goodness. If you're not familiar, the amount of work over the years that has to go into that is absolutely incredible. What an honor. And what a thrill that must be for you, Carmen, to really just be so proud of him. Not only for that, but for enjoying theater and a degree in cybersecurity. Oh my goodness, he's going places. And Denise writes in, my almost 17-year-old doesn't let diabetes get in the way of anything. She is a junior and has a 5.1 GPA, VP of National Honor Society, VP of Anchor Club, member of Beta Club, and Mu Alpha Theta, first chair alto sax player, starting her 5th year of varsity track, runs track year-round and hopes to run track for a Division I school. This weekend, she placed first in the 800-meter at her track meet with All-American honors. Okay, that is amazing, and I am exhausted reading all of that. Amazing accomplishments with or without type 1. Congratulations, and keep us posted. Man, how about that for your college resume? I hope that she gets in, and then she can probably just relax a little bit in college. Wow. Well, Billy, Carmen, and Denise, thank you so much for telling us about your incredible kids. And if you've got something good going on, tell me. It doesn't have to be that amazing. I mean, these kids really did a great job. It can be as simple as celebrating a diversity, somebody doing something good for somebody else. You know what we're talking about here. If you have a story for me, just email me, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com, or keep an eye out in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. I'm posting every week asking for these good news stories, and definitely let me know when you got something. Thank you all so much for that. Looking ahead to next week, we are going to have our second Diabetes Connections Extra episode. This is where we do a deep dive into basics of diabetes management. We did insulin in January. Well, this month we're going to be talking about how to use an insulin pump. How does it work? How does it attach to the body? What do you have to do to use one? All the questions that surround an insulin pump will be going in depth next week. I also want to let you know that I'm doing something a little bit new, and I'll post this here and there on social media. I'm kind of doing an experiment with a new kind of podcast. It's not really a new show. I'm talking to students at Syracuse University in about 2 weeks, and I'm talking to them about podcasting. And as part of that, I want to help them podcast in the most easy way possible. Can you podcast from your dorm room? And so to do that, I'm learning a new podcast system that's super easy on your phone. So I'm going to be putting out little teeny, couple of minute episodes here and there. So look out for that. It has nothing to do with diabetes. I just think it's going to be fun to learn this system. It's just going to be talking about some stuff that I find interesting. So I'll let you know how that goes. Hopefully the experiment won't be started and ended in the same episode. I'm pretty sure I can figure this thing out, but it'll be fun to see. Thank you so much for listening. My goodness. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. I love doing this show, and it is such an honor to talk to you about these issues each and every week. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.